Okay, today we're going to replace the water pump on a 2003 Mustang GT. I've removed this coolant pipe here just so we can actually see it better when replacing, but you probably don't even need to do that. The good thing about these cars is that the water pump is on the front, not down the side in a stupid place, so it should be really easy for anyone to do. It takes a couple different sockets for your socket wrench, and obviously the new parts and a couple optional extras too, so really easy to do. I do recommend replacing the drive belt if you have bearing failure or anything like that, because it might not be perfect. It might be loose, something might have happened here causing it to stretch or tear or anything like that, but I do recommend you change your drive belt also when you do this, especially if it's in a hard to reach place. You get two birds with one stone there. Okay, how do you know if your old water pump is failing? Well, you will usually get a coolant leak from the front of the engine. It will appear to come from just around here at the front, but really it's leaking from the pump, which is that cog right above there. So it will leak through here, through the big engine main sort of cog here, onto the floor. So that is a common indicator that your water pump is failing, which is a front coolant leak. Also, obviously your engine will be running hotter because you have less coolant in there. But the main reason is because it's leaking out the weep hole on the front, which is by design actually, to let you know that it's time to replace it. So that is how you... one of the first things you want to do is drain your coolant, because when that pump comes off, you're going to have a big gusher if you don't. So you see that white little hex nut right there? Just undo that, get a little pan, catch it all, and it'll all come gushing out. You know, it might take about 10 minutes. I wouldn't recommend reusing the coolant if you had bearing failure or anything like that, because it might be contaminated and ruin the life of the new pump. So I do recommend using new coolant afterwards. Okay, we're going to change the water pump in the Mustang. Let's move this pipe out the way so you can see it better. It's this little cog right here. We've got to take off a 10mm socket. We'll take that off, 4 bolts. But first we've got to take the drive belt off with the it's a normal ratchet without the socket. Slip it in the tensioner right there and pull it back to release the slack off the belt. Now the belt's off, undo these bolts right here. It helps having 2 wrenches, so you can use one here and one here to stop it rotating while you take these bolts off. Okay, so that's kind of what it looks like. So as you're holding the torque on this one, you'll be loosening with this one. Eventually you'll get 3 of them off. The last one, you'll notice you have to tighten the one opposite a little, but once they're all loose they should start coming off until you got all 4 of them off. Right, the cog should slide right off now. Next you want to get a 13mm socket and undo this one, this one, this one, and one just underneath there. And we can start pulling off this old pump. Slide the new one on. Alright, now the bolts are out. We've got to get a bit of a hammer and start trying to knock this out. You can see it's coming away a little bit, but I think it's a little better if you get a bit of force behind there and start pushing it slightly, and the whole thing should just slip out. This bit will be getting all replaced, so it doesn't matter too much if you damage this bit, but try not to damage the housing or any of the surrounding components when you're doing leverage and things like that. Right, you'll know if you emptied the coolant beforehand, because that will start gushing, but luckily we did that, so there's minimal mess there. So you've got your old pump off. You can see common problems are bearing failure. If your oil gets a bit too hot, the bearing seizes. That will be indicated by some kind of rough turning when you turn the cog. Really too hard to do with one hand. This one seems okay. The problem with this is that the seal on the outside is just totally gone. I don't know if you can see that in comparison to the new one. You see this is a fresh seal right here. That's the only problem with this one. And so there's something called a weep hole, which is right down here, which starts leaking upon seal failure, which is like a manufactured design. Really, it's by design that it does that. So when you do see coolant leaking out the weep hole, it's time to replace it. So luckily we caught that in time before it caused more serious problems. Now the question you may have is, why don't you just replace the seal? Yeah, sure we could, but the seal was I think $7. The whole pump with the seal was only $20. So, and then some cars are really hard to get to their pump. Luckily with the Mustang it's right on the front, easily accessible. Some of them are way down there on the side, which involves you getting up underneath, so it's good to change the belt, which we're going to do anyway, the belt and the pump while you're already down there. So it's usually more of a labor intensive exercise. Luckily with the Mustang it's right on the front, really easy to get to. So we're just going to replace the whole pump today, and then I know I have a lot more thousands of miles on the pump before I have to replace it again. So now we're going to put the new one back in. You have the new pump right here. You might want to dab a tiny bit of oil along the seal just to lubricate it, it's up to you. But just the tiniest bit, don't go crazy, we actually want it to seal. Then slot that in as level as you can when it goes back in. Don't go side in first, otherwise we'll have a few problems. So make sure that goes in perfectly, then we'll start putting the bolts back in. Okay, we're about to put the bolts back in. Might be a good idea just to pop a little bit anti-seize on these bolts. They're kind of long, just so if there is a next time for you, you don't have any problems getting these bolts off. There is a lot of coolant going around the area, so it's good to get a bit of anti-seize on those. You can see the new one's in just fine. Don't worry if it's not exactly the same mirror image as your old one. The key is that the cog is at the same placement to drive the belt in the same place. That's what you should be focused about, really. But if your part number is compatible, I wouldn't worry about it. So now we're going to put the bolts back in a cross pattern. So this one followed by this one, then this one, etc. So that it goes in kind of flush and not all on one side, like when you put a wheel back on your car, for example. So let's go and do that. Alright, pump's back on. Let's put the cog and everything on in reverse order. A lot of people recommend you put on a new drive belt, especially if your pump is hard to access. That is almost 100% must in my book. But on a Mustang, you know, it's right on the front, it's more accessible, but I do recommend putting on a new drive belt. So we're ready to go. Just make sure it spins fine. You never know, you might have really balled something up, but it looks perfect to me, so let's get it back together. One last thing, when you fill your coolant back up, make sure you do 50-50 mix, obviously, of antifreeze and water, but don't use tap water, use distilled water or drinking water. The problem with tap water is that it contains lots of other minerals and things that tend to corrode internal components of cars, which will actually reduce the life of your brand new water pump you've just spent ages putting in there. So just make sure to use even a bottle of drinking water, anything like that. Just don't use water from the tap. And that is about it, really. The last thing, once you've topped this off, you might need to what's called burp or bleed the system, because there's air trapped in here. Now we've just put a new pump on, so every now and then you'll have to release the air out of here. Just because it is a closed system, we want to bleed all that air out of there. So what I tend to do, I start the car, go for a little ride, then just slowly undo that a bit. You can hear the hissing, but obviously use some protection, maybe a towel or something like that, so you don't get splashed, because this gets really hot. And that is it, really. So yeah, I hope you had a good luck with that, and enjoy your car for some years more. Take care.